Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name is Gavin, and happy 4th of July to you guys. I hope you guys are doing something fun with your families today, or hanging out with some friends, going outside, and doing something to celebrate the 4th today. If you're watching today's episode, there's the potential I might go live later today after you're seeing this video. We'll see about that. It depends on how my plans for today evolve. But if you guys are new around here, make sure to drop down, click that subscribe button, and turn the bell on for today's episode. Drop a like for the 4th. And for today's holiday, of course, this video we're going to be diving into our 5 players, or at least 5 players of mine, at the running back position that I absolutely love and see having the overall upside to finish as the top running back in fantasy football this season. Now, obviously, only one player on the list today can finish as the overall RB1, and it is totally possible, it's not without the realm of conversation, that someone else, not in today's video, could finish as the RB1. But today I'll be talking through the guys, these 5 players, why I love them. We'll be diving into a ton of other fantasy content throughout this summer, throughout the regular season. All things fantasy football can be found here on the SFS channel. So all the reason to go click that subscribe button, click some of the links in the description of today's video. It helps out the channel a lot here and helps us grow something special. So I'm not going to waste too much more time. Let's get right into our first player. All right, one more time, the purpose of today's episode is to dive into some of those best running backs in 2022 fantasy football, talk through the situations, break down, give you guys some analysis here. If you're looking for some more details, some more information on each of the 5 names I'm talking through today, head over to sizzlefantasy.com, sign up for an account, and become an SFS Gold member. That's going to get you access to my redraft and Dynasty draft guide collections with positional and big board rankings, sleepers, busts, must-own players, the whole works. You'll get access to me if you want to go over on Underdog Fantasy and sign up using promo code SFS when you deposit $10 or more. They're going to match your money, so you put $10 in, you're going to get $20 to play with. You put $100 in, you're going to get $200 to play with, and you're going to get access to that stuff, all of it, the entire website on sizzlefantasy.com again through the entire season up until the Super Bowl. You'll have access through the following Monday, so you'll get access to all that stuff for potentially just $10 if that's all you put in that account. And we'll get you guys hooked up with that stuff. The Underdog team is on a 4th of July weekend, holiday right now, but once they come back, they'll get in contact with me and let me know which of you guys have signed up for that, and we can get you access to the draft guide and the in-depth player profiles for each of these 5 players. Again, those are all completed on sizzlefantasy.com with some more information, trade evaluation, stocks, whether I'm buy, selling, or holding these players, and then all of the obviously pertinent information for this upcoming fantasy football season, both short and long-term analysis. Jonathan Taylor here, of course, is the first player we have to talk about when it comes to a player with the upside to finish as the RB1 overall this year. Now, this is about as unexciting as it gets because this is the RB1 from a season ago. There is absolutely nothing groundbreaking in this evaluation here. His ADP right now, as you see, is 1.2 overall. It's because last year, again, he was the RB1, and I'll read off some stats here, show you exactly, and, kind of paint the path to how he finished as the RB1 last year. It was a weaker RB1 finish, so if you ask me, I'm not so sure JT is the back-to-back RB1. I think it's very much within the realm of possibility that someone easily steps up to the plate and bunny hops him here this season. I still think JT is a lock to be a top 5 running back finisher this year. Even because of his super safe floor, I'd go as far to say he's probably a top 3 lock. However, again, there are other names on this list that can easily upset him and easily surpass him in terms of both points per game scoring this year and collective fantasy scoring. One of the reasons JT also finished as the RB1 last year was because of consistency and availability. JT did not miss games last year, so you had a guy suiting up in pretty much every contest, a guy who showed up every week except for he kind of faded a little bit in the last couple weeks of the fantasy playoffs. But JT, again, was the top dog. How did he get there? 92 red zone touches. You need that elite touchdown volume to have a high finish at the running back position. Of those 92 touches, 20 of them came on the goal line, so you're talking about a quick dive into the end zone for 6 fantasy points. Of course, those are very high numbers. That ranked number 1 overall at the position. The Colts were number 4 in team run plays per game, so they were running the football at a high rate. What does that mean? Jonathan Taylor is getting a high volume of touches, and behind a very, very proficient offensive line, a team that's moving defenders out of the way, creating gaps in the run lane, and creating space for him to make plays. He was 5th in total snap share, so again, that goes back to volume metrics here, talking about a guy who had an incredible amount of opportunity. Now, he wasn't north of 70% in terms of his snap share, which seems like that number would be a bit low, but it's only the most elite of elite players and guys who see basically no competition for touches in their backfield that end up going north of that metric. So it does seem a little bit low, but again, he was 5th in snap share, so that was still a nice marker despite the fact that it was at about 68%. He was number 1 in total rush yards. Now, this also, rush yards can be an arbitrary stat for fantasy running back finishes and scoring here, but for Jonathan Taylor, he was so far ahead of the rest of the pack. He finished number 1 with 1,811 rushing yards. Derrick Henry was the rushing yards leader from the season prior, going north of 2,000 yards. When you get to that high of an amount, it matters. But when you're talking about a standard 1,000-yard season, and you pace that out over a 17-game schedule, the points per game you're getting from those rushing value and those rushing yardage totals alone is not very great. So then you go to total touchdowns. He was number 1 in total TDs again, and that comes from the insane nearly 100 opportunities he had inside the 20-yard line last year. The one reason that I think he may not repeat as the RB1 that I kind of prefaced a little bit earlier, and the number one factor that he may not go back-to-back this year is he was just 18th in target share last year. So you're talking about a guy who had just over 10% of the Colts' target share in that offense, 10.6% to be exact. He was out-targeted by Nyheim Hines. That's probably something I'm expecting to definitely happen this year, especially if the Colts want to try and keep JT's plate a little bit lighter and use him as a pure workhorse running back. He's still going to see a lot of touches. He's still in an offense where Matt Ryan is not the best tight window passer. This is someone who is 31st in red zone accuracy, so throwing passes inside the 20-yard line where everything gets a little bit more scrunched up and congested, tough to throw those passes into those tight windows. He's going to get a ton of red zone opportunities and red zone work again this year. But again, that lack thereof of elite receiving upside and ceiling is what could potentially hold him back this year. So that brings us into Christian McCaffrey right here. His ADP is slipping just a little bit down to the 3rd overall pick. This is a guy who is, well, you see it here. His ADP is now 3. That means that Cooper Kupp is basically bunny hopping and surpassing him in terms of being the popular pick at the 2nd overall selection based off of Underdog's best ball ADP. Now, again, that is based off of a lot of times in Underdog, because of the best ball format, upside takes precedence over floor. Nonetheless, Cooper Kupp definitely has a higher floor than Christian McCaffrey. We're not going to dive into that too much right now. If you're looking for another piece of content to watch from the channel here, I highly recommend my Christian McCaffrey versus Jonathan Taylor ADP battle video that I did a couple weeks back. I go super deep into all the stats. I compare their production from their best seasons. I compare their skill sets, their current situations for this year, mash it all up into one big analysis and evaluation, and ultimately we make a decision on which player should be drafted ahead of the other. What essentially one piece of that analysis that I synthesized and pulled away from that is the fact that CMC definitely has a higher fantasy ceiling than Jonathan Taylor does, and we saw that with this 2019 campaign where he finished as the RB1 overall with 29.3 points per game. And you look at this 2022 Panthers offense, CMC totally and utterly still could completely command this offense this year and far and away be one of the most utilized backs in the entire National Football League. Now, I am not expecting CMC to get back to those 2019 numbers. When I'm looking at the things he put up on the table, the stats are just totally gaudy. He had 98.4% of the team's snap share, so I just told you about how Jonathan Taylor had just 68% of his team's snap share. CMC went 30% higher than that metric, so you're talking about, almost a 99% snap share in this offense. There was barely ever another running back seeing the field. This is a guy who had 143 targets out of the backfield. That was a 23.7% target share that season and was number 1, obviously, in that metric amongst running backs. He was also number 1 in his given fantasy season in total touchdowns scored, 19 total, 1 behind Jonathan Taylor's 20 total from the 2021 season. However, these, again, I think are slightly unattainable for CMC at this point in time in his career. You've got an offense that now has the likes of Deontay Foreman and Chuba Hubbard. It's not like they're a huge threat to take touches away from him, but they're going to be sprinkled in there infrequently to have situational roles to take some of the weight off of CMC's plate, because this is a guy who has had just 10 games played the last 2 years. That's the huge red flag here. The skill set, the usage, it's all there. The one thing that we're waiting on is his health. We're waiting for him to finally be able to strap him up and play a full season. And to be quite honest, there is a possibility that that's just not possible anymore. His body may have deteriorated and worn down a little bit too much here. But I feel confident that he should at least have a chance to be the number one overall finisher because of the role that he could still bring to this offense. So I'm still very high on CMC. I am not expecting 143 targets. I am not expecting a 98% snap share. I think 80% realistically would be insane to think of at this point in time because, again, Foreman's going to take some work. Chuba Hubbard's going to get sprinkled in there as a change of pace, explosive player as well. He is absolutely terrible at catching passes, has total brick hands out of the backfield, but besides the point, what I'm trying to emphasize here is CMC is still going to be totally involved as a pass catcher. But then the other things working against him that you have here is a bottom-level offensive line. This is a team that's not going to provide elite levels of efficiency on the ground. And you've still got a team that's kind of shackled by Sam Darnold's upside. What do I mean by that? He is not an elite quarterback. He does not provide game difference-making upside and potential for this football team to make plays. We saw him start out very good last year against the worst of the worst for opponents. And then he totally started, blowing up this offense internally and sputtering, and it became a totally utter disaster for this Panthers football team. So, quarterback remains a huge question mark, which, to be fair, in that 2019 season it was as well. Just because an offense isn't elite or over and, above and beyond proficient in terms of what they do, the volume can still replace that, or the volume can still compensate for a lack of efficiency if enough touches are given. Now, the Panthers are going to have to be a little bit better than what they were last season. They're going to have to show some signs of positive progression and steps forward this year in order for CMC to be the RB1. But I also expect him to have such a high touch count and snap percentage, a usage rate, that he should be able to get there at the end of the day if, again, he just does stay healthy. That 2019 season as well, something I wanted to reference, was he had 405 routes run at the position. That was good for 25.3 routes run per game. That obviously was number one at the RB position for that season. This year, I wanted to compare similar stats in just 7 games played. He had 89 routes run, good for only 12.7 routes per game. That being, again, from this 2021 season that we just had here. CMC played 3 games in 2020, 7 games in 2021. So you've seen some regression, and again, that's why I think it's unrealistic for us to have the same expectations for CMC coming into this year that we had during that 2019 season, or rather so what we had in 2020 after he showed us what he could do in 2019. But I think those days are gone. I think that 24 fantasy points per game would be, maybe enough to get the job done, maybe 25. Jonathan Taylor, again, was a weaker RB1 finish, so we have to factor all that stuff in. DeAndre Swift is the next name I definitely think could be kind of that next CMC or Austin Eckler level player, and I see a ton of opportunity for improvement, touchdown progression, efficiency improvements, a lot of things, especially situationally, looking at Detroit and the things they've done this offseason that can provide an infrastructure in this offense for Swift to be hands down one of the most elite assets in fantasy football. So again, I compare his pass-catching skill set, and he's a very good complementary running back as well. However, where he really makes his money at in the fantasy business here is catching passes, is being an elite PPR asset, and that's where we get that CMC and Austin Eckler comparison. Now, what DeAndre Swift has going for him this season that an Eckler or a CMC may not in 2022 is youth. And no, CMC and Austin Eckler are not super old players by any stretch of the imagination. They're both in their, I'll say, late 20s. They're not quite to their late 20s, but they're at the back end of the middle of their 20s. However, for the most violent position in sports, the running back position where you're getting slammed, body slammed, tackled, or rolled up on every single play, you age a lot faster than the other positions do. So for Swift, this is a big advantage. He's still relatively fresh. He's had some fluky injuries that have caused him to play just 13 games each in both his first and second NFL seasons. But just like CMC here, if we could project him to have a little bit more health and a little bit more luck in terms of the injury struggles he's had in his first 2 seasons, and again, missing 3 games in 2020 and 4 games in 2021 is not the end of the world, but if you're going to finish as the RB1, you're probably not going to do so missing that many contests. The skill set is all there. All he has to do is show up, get a little bit better this season, and I think he will absolutely deliver. This is a player who is second in target share last year amongst running backs at 18.4%. That is fantastic. It might see a slight reduction with Jameson Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and TJ Hawkinson all in-house. However, I could easily see it staying the same because if the Lions are staying on the football field longer, sustaining more drives, and having the opportunity to extend drives and, maintain a longer time of possession, maybe his target share goes down a little bit, but his overall targets stay the same or maintain themselves on a year-over-year basis because of the added opportunities into this offense, whereas the Lions have been punting a lot as of late. Additionally, you've also got a player who barely had 1,000 yards from scrimmage this year, 617 yards rushing and 452 receiving yards. We just mentioned with Jonathan Taylor how a 1,000-yard rusher can be considered relatively arbitrary because on a points-per-game basis, those numbers are not very impressive. We're talking collectively here. DeAndre Swift barely had 1,000 yards, almost 1,100, but still not super impressive there. There is a lot of opportunity for growth. And again, he did do that in just 13 games. So there is a little bit of a spike in terms of his his yardage per game acquired. But you want to see that number higher, and that's definitely something I think can improve. The huge ticker for me is touchdown progression. If you're going to finish as the RB1, you have to finish close to 20 touchdowns. That's just what it is in 2019. CMC had 19 this past season. It was 20 for JT. 2020 was I think it was 21 for Alvin Kamara that year. Swift only had 7. So if he's going to get to that, let's say 19 to 21 touchdown threshold that it takes to become the RB1 overall, you're talking about a 200% growth in terms of how many more touchdowns he's going to score. 175, 180 to 200% growth at the touchdown production department. So that's all going to come down to how many of the touches are allocated to DeAndre Swift in the red zone. There wasn't a ton of them to be had last season. Only 27 red zone touches and 4 goal line carries, which ranked 29th, so bottom 3 amongst starters in the league last year. Again, this can improve, though, if the offense gets better, if they're sustaining drives, having more swings at the bat in the red zone. That's going to help those numbers naturally rise as well, even if the regularity of these opportunities is not increasing. So a couple more stats I want to reference here. He was 5th in yards created and number 1 in yards created per touch. So those 4 games missed played a bit of a factor into his total yards created count. However, in terms of his efficiency, what he was doing on a per touch basis, nobody was better at creating yards every single touch than DeAndre Swift was. So a phenomenal, dynamic, elusive, elite pass-catching running back. Here's what brings to the table, what DeAndre Swift brings to the table. I could not be more excited about him. He is one of my must-own players. You'll get access to my rounds 1 through 20 must-own players on sizzlefantasy.com. When you become a gold member, go check that stuff out. Lots of good stuff and details, exclusive content to be found there. And you'll see me drooling over DeAndre Swift if you'd like to hear more from that side of the argument today. Najee Harris, his ADP is 9.3 overall on Underdog best ball formats. Najee here, the thing we need to focus on when evaluating Najee Harris for fantasy football in 2022 is volume. You've probably heard the term volume is king, and in this circumstance, that is not much different. Najee Harris finds himself in a situation where, to be quite frank, he's not going to be very efficient. We saw that last year. He was just 41st in total yards per touch a season ago. However, he led the NFL in touches as a rookie. So for running backs, no one had a higher amount of combined rushing and receiving receptions plus rushes, essentially, is what that means. Nobody touched the football more than Najee Harris. He was the volume king in 2021. And I expect much of the same here in 2022. This is going to be a guy who is the focal point of this Pittsburgh Steelers offense, and a guy who, again, we know going in is going to struggle with efficiency. He's not playing behind an elite offensive line. He's got a rookie quarterback who's probably going to make his fair share of mistakes. I don't want to say I'm a big Kenny Pickett guy. I respect and appreciate the talent. I think that once he settles in and finds his groove, I think he's going to be maybe a slightly better Kirk Cousins. I think he's got a lot of potential as a franchise quarterback. I don't think he is a elite NFL QB by any stretch of the imagination, but he's going to be just fine once he gets his legs underneath him. That's fine. We're not talking about Kenny Pickett here. The point is the impact he has on Najee Harris. I think that it's going to lead to a team that runs the football at an incredibly high rate, tries to protect their young quarterback, or at least limit the mistakes that the MVP, Mr. Trubisky, can make in terms of using him in a more game manager style fashion here if he is to be the starter early on this season. And that's going to create a situation where Najee Harris is going to be touching the ball 20 plus times per game, seeing the bulk of the red zone attempts, because like I mentioned with Matt Ryan, a seasoned veteran earlier on, those inside the 20-yard line throws in the tight window where everything, mistakes are expanded, and you really have to minimize the mistakes you make in that area of the field. Otherwise, they can be totally disastrous for your team. Najee will be eating up touches in that area of the field, both receiving-wise and in the rushing department. This is a player who was 5th in target share last year, just 14.5% of the Pittsburgh offense, but this team aired it out a lot with Big Ben Roethlisberger throwing underneath passes. He was number 1 in total routes run amongst the running back position, 25 per game, or about 25 per game, 24.9 to be exact for Najee Harris this past season. So a lot of work to be had in the rushing and receiving departments. He was number 2 in evaded tackles. This is a fantastic player. He was drafted in the first round for a reason, a pure workhorse in terms of his size and his skill set. The guy who was 8th in breakaway runs, so a player who can obviously get out in space and make things happen once he gets past the second and third levels of the defense, which again can be a struggle because that O-line is not producing at elite level. However, they have been making minor steps in the right direction to fix that up a little bit, and he was number 2 in yards created. So Najee, the player, is a capable back. He's got all the skills you look for. He's going to touch the football at a ridiculously high rate. And at the end of the day, I think that alone gives him a chance here. If he finds enough red zone work where he's scoring touchdowns at a ballistic rate, if he finds himself catching a high volume of passes and being in the top 3 to 4 players in terms of target share, in terms of receptions, in terms of receiving production, that's how Najee will get this done here. He doesn't even have to have that great of rushing stats, which is really what's pulling that efficiency number down. And if he can do that and help this Steelers team stay afloat, remember, CMC and the Colts offense, when they finished, heck, let's go to the Saints in 2020. These weren't the best offenses in football. These were middle of the pack, and in CMC's case, a below average offense that had to lean on the running back to be the savior, the hero, the guy that pulled and pushed the needle for these teams. And that is exactly what Najee Harris is for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that is exactly what Saquon Barkley is here for the New York Giants, and he's been doing that since 2018. Now, has he had success doing that every season? No. He hasn't had a very good fantasy year by his standards since 2018 when he was, number 1 in fantasy points per game, I believe. That was a long time ago. But Saquon is an insanely talented player, one of the best products out of college we've seen at the position since. I honestly don't think we've seen a better running back prospect come out of college since Saquon came out of Penn State back in 2018, and that was why he was the 2nd overall pick in the draft. Saquon additionally is one of the most explosive athletes in the National Football League, which is something that is not reflected in the ugly bare-bones stats that we have from the 2021 season. I mean, it is one of the most disappointing fantasy years I think that we can chalk up. I myself am guilty of underestimating the effects that the ACL injury would have on the most physical position in sports. That is why this season I'm going to be a bit more cautious and try not to get ahead of myself with evaluating upside for guys like J.K. Dobbins, who's coming back off of a similar ACL injury, and is a guy who is probably not going to be a workhorse for that Ravens offense. However, coming into 2022, if you've been around here on the channel, you've heard me rave about Saquon Barkley. I posted a YouTube short about him, giving a little in-depth player profile for him. This is a guy I love for this season. His ADP has skyrocketed since May when I started doing drafts this year. It's up to 19.7 overall now for a guy who started in the 30s, which is a very significant jump. You're talking about going from a guy who was a late 3rd round pick to now being a guy who's drafted in the middle of the 2nd round of leagues. You're approaching the dead middle of the 2nd round, which is insane to me. Again, this is all via Underdog Fantasy. Promo code SFS. Get you double your money, and the draft guide's free on sizzlefantasy.com. However, we have to get over this. There's going to be players, and I know this is the case for some of you guys watching and listening at home, is you think back to, and you may be guilty of this for a different player on today's list for a different reason, whether it's Christian McCaffrey, who burned you 2 seasons in a row, Saquon, who burned you, in the 2021 season. you have to get over production of past seasons, and you have to look at how situations have evolved, what has changed, what has stayed the same, and what is different. For Saquon, what's different is this season, and it's subtle, but it's also really important. It's that as opposed to rehabbing, Saquon spent this season training. In 2021, heading into that season, he was rehabbing an ACL injury, and we could see mentally it wasn't there. He wasn't ready to be Saquon Barkley again. You saw hesitancy in the hole in terms of putting his shoulder down, playing physically, whether it was having an opening in the defense to break away an explosive rush, and he just didn't quite hit it like he should have. These are things that were evident as viewers watching Giants games last year. I expect him to be totally right this year. I expect him to be 100% healthy, both mentally and physically. I expect he's gotten himself right this offseason. And now, when we look at these ugly, terrible, disastrous numbers for, again, one of the most talented players we've seen at the position in the last 5 years, we see beautiful upside and the potential to absolutely smash on his ADP. And, if we want to talk about anyone on this list who has a chance to match Christian McCaffrey's 98.4% snap share in 2019, the guy on this list that could do that is Saquon Barkley. There is no competition in New York that can possibly take touches away from him. You're talking about Matt Breida being a, complimentary change of pace back. Yeah, right. Saquon, again, being that explosive athlete that he is, having the workhorse size, speed, pass-catching ability, he is going to see virtually every touch in this backfield until he drops flat on the ground. Now, the upside is just too good to pass on here. You've got a guy who has, we talked about DeAndre Swift earlier and the ridiculous touchdown progression he could have. You're talking about Saquon having absolutely unholy touchdown progression potential this year. You've got a guy who had just 4 TDs a season ago. If you want to get him to that 20 touchdown threshold that, again, usually is between 18 to 22 touchdowns, nets you an RB1 overall finish, especially with an extra game now, will probably swing towards the higher side of things. If he gets to 20 touchdowns, that would be a 5x improvement from where he was at in 2021. So a 400% jump equaling 500% of that total finish from 2021. So that's insane. Again, efficiency for a guy who we consider to be insanely explosive. He was just 65th in yards per carry, 47th in yards per touch, and 39th in breakaway run rate. Those things are all going to get better. There's no chance, even with the minimal improvements the Giants made up front, that he finishes that poorly again this season. He was 24th in yards created in just 13 games played. That, again, is not something super flashy that we have where we want to see it at. Those numbers should get better this year, and I expect that they will, again, with more games played if he's able to stay healthy, and obviously with the improvements at offensive tackle, providing the ability to get off tackle runs and explosive plays created, and then the offensive coaching staff and regime that I think is really going to help this team take the next step forward this season. So those are 5 players I think all have the potential to finish as the RB1 this season. I'm super excited about all 5 of these guys. I think that they're all legitimate players that could get you towards your end goal of winning a championship this season. It's just really tricky. With running backs, you really got to play your cards right and really get lucky, because any one of these players could finish as the RB1 if you told me they finished and played 17 games this year. But the reality of the situation is that maybe none of these guys will. I mean, there's a chance that even the RB1 misses a game. So there is a lot of things that are out of our control. All we can do is take a look at the infrastructure of situations and evaluate those for what they are and try to make the best decisions based on the facts that we have on the table. So thank you guys so much for watching today's video. Again, make sure to check out Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code SFS and get the draft guides free. Again, they'll double your money, and then they'll send me confirmation that you signed up, and we'll get you squared away on sizzlefantasy.com with those draft guides. Also, go check out some of the other links in the description. Check out our social medias. We're trying to grow our TikTok right now, our Instagram accounts, Facebook, all that great stuff. So go check all that stuff out, you guys. I'll see you next time. Peace out.